Okay, so it's Friday night. I'm currently working on finishing up my big Witch Hat Atelier Season 1 overview video, but I wanted to go ahead and sit down and get out some of my basic thoughts on the last two episodes and the season finale. And the most interesting thing that I personally noticed while watching these final two episodes is that the villains, the Brimmed Caps themselves, they don't actually seem all that interested in hurting or especially like killing the younger apprentices. That doesn't really seem to be their core goal. Not that it's something that they would totally and outright avoid doing. I don't think that they're totally opposed to killing pointed cap witches, but I think that their real goal, their actual core goal, is basically to expose the institution of the elders and the teachers and the different factions within the pointed cap witches, to expose them as liars and hypocrites, and to basically put the apprentices themselves in positions where they not only need to, but want to use, engage in, or simply learn about forbidden magic in order to solve the problems that they've been confronted by. The season finale's FMA Brotherhood alchemy type moment, what was clearly meant to be the wow moment in showing us just how screwed up, unconventional, and unpredictable forbidden magic can be, was one example of this. But obviously the second member of the Brimmed Caps attempt to mark Agot with a magic seal, like literally cut into her skin, was another version of this, simply attempting to put her in a situation where her only choice would be to become a user of forbidden magic as someone who would basically be exiled from the institution of the pointed cap witches. But also what is basically the series ground zeroes moment, Coco being given the book of forbidden magic and accidentally crystalline freezing her mother within their house, is another moment like this. We've obviously been shown that Coco has been thinking through how one might reverse engineer, literally invert the signs within the forbidden magic that sealed her mother into this crystalline state. And what's sort of left more implicit and less explicit, is that for her to accomplish this, she would obviously have to know the forbidden magic spell that sealed her mother in. She would have to know it well enough to manipulate it and invert it. I've seen some people online saying that it's kind of ridiculous to think that Coco could possibly be the first person to think of the idea of inverting forbidden magic to undo something like this, but it's important to also point out that the sort of orthodox, the tradition of the pointed cap witches, is to outright refuse to use forbidden magic, even if it could have explicitly and exclusively positive effects. They make it pretty clear in season 1 that the pointed cap witches basically lie and pretend that there's no such thing as healing magic. But I think there's also an argument to be made that this idea of forbidden magic being an absolute no-go, no matter what the type is, based on a very explicit set of rules, might also lead the most devout followers of the sort of orthodox of the pointed cap witches to a line of adherence and orthodox thinking where they would never even consider the option to do such a thing, especially because the very idea of studying or even understanding anything about forbidden magic seems to be an absolute taboo outside of certain specific pointed cap witches having the ability to erase the memory of anyone who has actually come to learn enough about forbidden magic to ever put such a thing into practice. There's also obviously the fear mindset at play, where even if someone within the different pointed cap factions was to come upon the knowledge of something like this, they would almost certainly be completely and utterly hush-hush, even with their most trusted companions and compatriots. Because if anyone was to find out that they knew about these things, they would not only risk having the memory of forbidden magic wiped, but the memory of basically everything that they build their livelihood around being erased. They could have every memory related to anything to do with magic erased by the one forbidden spell that is allowed within this society.
I guess irony can be pretty ironic sometimes.
And that is all basically to say that I think there's going to be an idea going forward, and maybe you could argue that it's already kind of ingrained within the first season, that Coco's mentality as an outsider, as someone who did not grow up with the knowledge of the orthodox way of thinking, her sort of simple childlike creativity and willingness to think through ideas that more orthodox members would never even consider and outright fear even thinking about, let alone putting into practice, might be something that's going to continue to come to the forefront. And once again, that's something that I think the Brimmed Cap witches seek to exploit. They seek to exploit the mentality of someone who is not only in a position where they have a reason to need and want to use forbidden magic in one way or another, but they also have somewhat more of a blank slate mentality and way of thinking about magic in a simple, childlike, creative way, with all preconceptions left at the door, is probably going to be an important element in the thematics of the series moving forward, but also, once again, something that I completely expect the Brimmed Cap witches to exploit. I think in some way or another, they're probably going to try to find a way to, once again, expose the Orthodox for the fact that they outright refuse to use certain magics, which would clearly benefit the general populace. And that's the sort of thing that the Brimmed Caps would obviously want to exploit within younger, more unorthodox outsider types than anyone else.
One day later.
Oh yeah, there was one more idea which I've been sort of navel-gazing about since watching the season finale of Witch Hat Atelier, and that is this idea of magic as being a corollary to a tool or technology with limitless potential, limitless possibility. This is something that I previously highlighted as a potential downside, but I do think that there's a reasonable argument that this is actually the point, and a fairly interesting and compelling point at that. I've seen some people compare magic in this universe to the hydrogen bomb or nuclear power, basically saying that as it concerns these technologies as well as magic within this universe, while the basic fundamental scientific concepts and the more rudimentary technologies which make up these modern technologies with near limitless potential and possibility may have initially been birthed by those with altruistic intentions and may have initially only been used for more benevolent initial use cases. And while those same fundamental ideas might still hold great potential as tools for positive change in the world, those same basic fundamental concepts and technologies would of course eventually go on to be used for more dangerous and malevolent use cases by less disciplined, less altruistic people, and also may have simply been used in ways that the people initially coming up with many of the basic scientific concepts never would have even considered a possibility, not only because they were more altruistic in a sense, but also in that they may have never even considered certain use case possibilities for those basic scientific concepts and fundamental, more rudimentary technologies. I was actually watching a documentary not too long ago on the history of computer science, and one of the first ideas that they brought up in this documentary was the fact that the earliest sort of rudimentary, fundamental conceptualization of what we now think of as a modern computer was actually written about in the 1830s, I believe it was. And while the basic rudimentary concept for what we might think of as a modern computer now was there in the mind's eye of this tinkering human in the 1830s, he obviously didn't yet have access to the sort of technology or resources that would have allowed him to actually build it. So he simply wrote about it and continued to expand upon the idea, and eventually it was later unearthed by, I believe, a reporter or a news article writer, something like that. But the thing is, this initial conceptualization that he came up with, I believe what he called the analytical engine, you'll notice it wasn't even called a machine, it was literally called an engine, was basically his idea, his conceptualization of a computerized calculator. He was really just trying to come up with a bigger, better abacus that worked out the mathematical problems and the like automatically, in the way that we would think of a computer doing today. But obviously, in the same way as the other rudimentary technologies and scientific concepts that we mentioned earlier, I highly doubt he could have ever imagined that now we're using those same basic concepts and rudimentary technologies to work on what we now call AI, as in large language models and generative AI, something which is arguably dangerous and at absolute best ethically highly questionable, but also something more aptly to this conversation, something that the original author of the analytical engine likely never would have even considered a possibility or thought of as a direction which humans would ever even want to go using those basic fundamental scientific concepts and rudimentary technologies that he was writing about. And in a similar way, to take it back to Witch Hat Atelier and the magic system within it, its limitless possibilities and limitless potential, and the concept of forbidden magic, it's likely, or at least possible, that many of those who initially came up with the fundamental or rudimentary concepts behind some of these spells that are now current day Witch Hat Atelier considered forbidden magic may have initially have been spells which would be truly beneficial for the general populace, created by those with more altruistic designs and altruistic intentions, created by people who would have never even considered the possibility of using them in malevolent ways.
Evil motherfucker!
We know, after all, that in Witch Hat Atelier, although healing magic exists, healing magic, something seemingly purely benevolent, altruistic, and good, is considered forbidden magic. And that seems on its face totally ridiculous until you come back to the idea of limitless possibility and limitless potential, as well as the simple concept that Coco talked about during this season of inverting spells. Healing magic may be clearly and unambiguously good when conceptualized and used by altruistic minds, but that's because those minds would never consider the idea that you might invert a healing spell and use it on someone of sound mind or sound body.
Evil motherfucker, black magic!
And once again, that simply brings us back to this idea that the tinkering mind of the human first conceptualizing any of these technologies, these tools, these magics, may not intend to see them used in malevolent ways, would likely not even consider certain possibilities that they might be used in those ways, and also simply not have the foresight to imagine how these things might be expanded and, once again, just used in ways that they never could have imagined, never would have even considered a possibility. But yeah, I'm probably spinning my wheels on that one at this point, but I hope that you found that little winding theme thing that I've, once again, simply been navel-gazing about since watching this season as interesting as I have, and back to wherever we were in the video. Or, if the video is, in fact, over, peace as always.